So infrastructure, you have 1.4 trillion thereabouts in commitments to build infrastructure. I've listened to a lot of what you've said about infrastructure. Here are some of the things you said. If people knew what we could do with compute, they would want way, way more. You said the gap between what we could offer today versus 10x compute and 100x compute is substantial. What can you help flesh that out a little bit? What are you going to do with so much more compute?
Well, I mentioned this earlier a little bit. The thing I'm personally most excited about is to use AI and lots of compute to discover new science. I am a believer that scientific discovery is the high order bit of how the world gets better for everybody. And if we can throw huge amounts of compute at scientific problems and discover new knowledge, which the tiniest bit is starting to happen now. It's very early. These are very small things, but my learning in the history of this field is once the squiggles start and it lifts off the x-axis a little bit, we know how to make that better and better. But that takes huge amounts of compute to do. So that's one area. I hope we're throwing lots of AI at discovering new science, curing disease, lots of other things. A kind of recent cool example here is we built the Sora Android app using Codex. And they did it in less than a month. They used a huge amount. One of the nice things about working at OpenAI is you don't get any limits on Codex. They used a huge amount of tokens, but they were able to do what would normally have taken a lot of people much longer. And Codex kind of mostly did it for us. And you can imagine that going much further, where entire companies can build their products using lots of compute. People have talked a lot about how video models are going to point towards these real-time generated user interfaces. That will take a lot of compute. Enterprises that want to transform their business will use a lot of compute. Doctors that want to offer good personalized healthcare that are constantly measuring every sign they can get from each individual patient. You can imagine that using a lot of compute. It's hard to frame how much compute we're already using to generate AI output in the world. But these are horribly rough numbers. So, and I think it's undisciplined to talk this way, but I always find these mental thought experiments a little bit useful. So forgive me for the sloppiness. Let's say that an AI company today might be generating something on the order of 10 trillion tokens a day out of frontier models. More, but not, it's not a quadrillion tokens for anybody, I don't think. Let's say there's 8 billion people in the world, and let's say on average these are, I think, totally wrong, but let's say the average number of tokens outputted by a person per day is 20,000. You can then start to, and the token, to be fair, then we'd have to compare the output tokens of a model provider today, not all the tokens consumed. But you can start to look at this and you can say, we're going to have these models at a company be outputting more tokens per day than all of humanity put together. And then 10 times that, and then 100 times that. And, in some sense, it's a really silly comparison. But in some sense, it gives a magnitude for how much of the intellectual crunching on the planet is human brains versus AI brains. And that's kind of the relative growth rates there are interesting.
And so I'm wondering, do you know that there is this demand to use this compute? Potentially, so for instance, would we have surefire scientific breakthroughs if, OpenAI were to put double the compute towards science, or with medicine? Would we have that clear ability to assist doctors? How much of this is sort of supposition of what's to happen versus clear understanding based off of what you see today that it will happen?
Everything based off what we see today is that it will happen. It does not mean some crazy thing can't happen in the future. Someone could discover some completely new architecture and there could be a 10,000 times efficiency gain, and then we would have really probably overbuilt for a while. But everything we see right now about how quickly the models are getting better at each new level, how much more people want to use them, each time we can bring the cost down, how much more people really want to use them. everything about that indicates to me that there will be increasing demand and people using these for wonderful things, for silly things. But it just so seems like this is the shape of the future. It's not just how many tokens we can do per day. It's how fast we can do them. As these coding models have gotten better, they can think for a really long time, but you don't want to wait for a really long time. So there will be other dimensions. It will not just be the number of tokens that we can do, but the demand for intelligence across a small number of axes and what we can do with those. If you have like a really difficult healthcare problem, do you want to use 5.2 or do you want to use 5.2 Pro, even if it takes dramatically more tokens?
I'll go with the better model.
I think you will.
Let's just try to go one level deeper. Going to the scientific discovery. Can you give an example of like a scientist? It doesn't have to, well, maybe it's one that you know today. That's like, I have problem X, and if I put, compute Y towards it, I will solve it, but I'm not able to today.
There was a thing this morning on Twitter where a bunch of mathematicians were saying, they were all like replying to each other's tweets. They're like, I was really skeptical that LLMs were ever going to be good. 5.2 is the one that crossed the boundary for me. It figured out this. It, with some help, it did this small proof. It discovered this small thing, but this is actually changing my workflow. And then people were piling on saying, yeah, me too. I mean, some people were saying 5.1 was already there, not many. But that's a very recent example. This model's only been out for 5 days or something, where people are like, all right, the mathematics research community seems to say like, okay, something important just happened.
I've seen Greg Brockman has been highlighting all these different mathematical scientific uses in his feed, and something has clicked, I think, with 5.2 among these communities. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as things progress.
One of the hard parts about compute at this scale is you have to do it so far in advance. So, that 1.4 trillion you mentioned, we'll spend it over a very long period of time. I wish we could do it faster. I think there would be demand if we could do it faster. But it just takes an enormously long time to build these projects and the energy to run the data centers and the chips and the systems and the networking and everything else. So that will be over a while. But, we, from a year ago to now, we probably about tripled our compute. We'll triple our compute again next year, hopefully again after that. Revenue grows even a little bit faster than that, but it does roughly track our compute fleet. So we have never yet found a situation where we can't really well monetize all the compute we have. If we had double the compute, we'd be at double the revenue right now.
Okay, let's talk about numbers since you brought it up. Revenue is growing, compute spend is growing, but compute spend still outpaces revenue growth. I think the numbers that have been reported are OpenAI is supposed to lose something like 120 billion between now and 2028, 29, where you're going to become profitable. So talk a little bit about how does that change? Where does the turn happen?
I mean, as revenue grows and as inference becomes a larger and larger part of the fleet, it eventually subsumes the training expense. So that's the plan. Spend a lot of money training, but make more and more. If we weren't continuing to grow our training costs by so much, we would be profitable way, way earlier. But the bet we're making is to invest very aggressively in training these big models.
The whole world is wondering how your revenue will line up with the spend. The question's been asked if the trajectory is to hit $20 billion in revenue this year, and the spend commitment is 1.4 trillion. So I think it would be great just to
over
lay
a
out,
very long period.
And that's why I wanted to bring it up to you. I think it would be great to just lay it out for everyone once and for all how those numbers are going to work.
It's very hard to really. I find that one thing, I certainly can't do it, and very few people I've ever met can do it. You can you have good intuition for a lot of mathematical things in your head, but exponential growth is usually very hard for people to do a good, quick mental framework on. For whatever reason, there were a lot of things that evolution needed us to be able to do well with math in our heads. Modeling exponential growth doesn't seem to be one of them. So the thing we believe is that we can stay on a very steep growth curve of revenue for quite a while. And everything we see right now continues to indicate that. We cannot do it if we don't have the compute. Again, we're so compute constrained, and it hits the revenue line so hard that I think if we get to a point where we have like a lot of compute sitting around that we can't monetize on a, profitable per unit of compute basis, be very reasonable to say, okay, this is like a little, how's this all going to work? But we've penciled this out a bunch of ways. We will, of course, also get more efficient on like a flops per dollar basis as, all of the work we've been doing to make compute cheaper comes to pass. But we see this consumer growth, we see this enterprise growth. There's a whole bunch of new kinds of businesses that we haven't even launched yet, but will. But compute is really the lifeblood that enables all of this. So we, there's like checkpoints along the way. And if we're a little bit wrong about our timing or math, we have some flexibility. But we have always been in a compute deficit. It is always constrained what we're able to do. I unfortunately think that will always be the case, but I wish it were less the case, and I'd like to get it to be less of the case over time, because I think there's so many great products and services that we can deliver, and it'll be a great business.
Okay, so it's effectively training costs go down.
As a percentage. They go up massively overall, but yeah.
And then your expectation is through things like this enterprise push, through things like people being willing to pay for ChatGPT, through the API, OpenAI will be able to grow revenue enough to pay for it with revenue.
Yeah, that is the plan.
Now, I think so the market's been kind of losing its mind over this recently. I think the thing that has spooked the market has been the debt has entered into this equation. And the idea around debt is you take debt out when there's something that's predictable. Yeah. And then companies will take the debt out, they'll build, and they'll have predictable revenue. But this is a new category. It is unpredictable. Is that, how do you think about the fact that debt has entered the picture here?
So first of all, I think the market more lost its mind when earlier this year, we would like meet with some company and that company's stock would go up 20% or 15% the next day.
That was crazy.
That felt really unhealthy. I'm actually happy that there's like a little bit more skepticism and rationality in the market now, because it felt to me like we were just totally heading towards a very unstable bubble. And now I think people are some degree of discipline. So I actually think I think people went crazy earlier and now people are being more rational. On the debt front, I think we do we know that if we build infrastructure, we the industry, someone's going to get value out of it. And it's still totally early. I agree with you, but I don't think anyone's still questioning there's not going to be value from like AI infrastructure. And so I think it is reasonable for debt to enter this market. I think there will also be other kinds of financial instruments. I suspect we'll see some unreasonable ones as people really, innovate about how to finance this sort of stuff. But, like lending companies money to build data centers, that seems fine to me.
I think the fear is that if things don't continue at pace, like here's one scenario, and you'll probably disagree with this, but like the model progress saturates, then the infrastructure becomes worth less than the anticipated value was. And then, yes, those data centers will be worth something to someone, but it could be that they get liquidated and someone buys them at a discount.
Yeah, and I do suspect, by the way, there will be some like booms and busts along the way. These things are never a perfectly smooth line. First of all, it seems very clear to me, and this is like a thing I happily would bet the company on, that the models are going to get much, much better. We have like a pretty good window into this. We're very confident about that. Even if they did not, I think there's like a lot of inertia in the world. It takes a while to figure out how to adapt to things. The overhang of the economic value that I believe 5.2 represents relative to what the world has figured out how to get out of it so far is so huge that even if you froze the model at 5.2, how much more like value can you create and thus revenue can you drive? I bet a huge amount. In fact, you didn't ask this, but if I can go on a rant for a second. We used to talk a lot about this 2x2 matrix of short timelines, long timelines, slow takeoff, fast takeoff, and where we felt at different times the kind of probability was shifting, and that was going to be, you could kind of understand a lot of the decisions and strategy that the world should optimize for based off of where you were going to be on that 2x2 matrix. There's like a z-axis in my head, in my picture of this, that's emerged, which is small overhang, big overhang. And I kind of thought that, I guess I didn't think about that hard, but like my retro on this is I must have assumed that the overhang was not going to be that massive, that if the models had a lot of value in them, the world was pretty quickly going to figure out how to deploy that. But it looks to me now like the overhang is going to be massive in most of the world. You'll have these like areas like, you know, some set of coders that'll get massively more productive by adopting these tools. But on the whole, you have this crazy smart model that, to be perfectly honest, most people are still asking this similar questions they did in the GPT-4 realm. Scientists different, coders different, maybe knowledge work is going to get different, but there's a huge overhang, and that has a bunch of very strange consequences for the world. We have not wrapped our head around all the ways that's going to play out yet, but is very much not what I would have expected a few years ago.
I have a question for you about this capability overhang. Basically, the models can do a lot more than they've been doing. I'm trying to figure out how the models can be that much better than they're being used for, but a lot of businesses, when they try to implement them, they're not getting a return on their investment. Or at least that's what they tell MIT.
I'm not sure quite how to think about that, because we hear all these businesses saying, you know, if you 10x the price of GPT 5.2, we would still pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
You're hugely underpricing this. We're getting all this value out of it. So that doesn't seem right to me. Certainly if you talk about like what coders say, they're like, this is, you know, I'd pay 100 times the price or whatever.
Just be bureaucracy that's messing things up.
Let's say you believe the GDP val numbers, and maybe you don't for good reason, maybe they're wrong, but let's say it were true. And for kind of these well-specified, not super long duration knowledge work tasks, 7 out of 10 times you would be as happy or happier with the 5.2 output. You should then be using that a lot. And yet it takes people so long to change their workflow. They're so used to asking the junior analyst to make a deck or whatever, that they're going to, like, it just, that's stickier than I thought it was. You know, I still kind of run my workflow in very much the same way, although I know that I could be using AI much more than I am.
Yep. All right, we got 10 minutes left.
Wow, that was quick.
I got 4 questions. Let's see if we can lightning round through them. So, the device that you're working on. We'll be back with OpenAI CEO Sam Altman right after this. What I've heard, phone size, no screen. Why couldn't it be an app if it's the phone without a screen?
First, we're going to do a small family of devices. It will not be a single device. There will be over time this is not speculation, so I may turn out to be totally wrong, but I think there will be a shift over time to the way people use computers, where they go from a sort of dumb reactive thing to a very smart proactive thing that is understanding your whole life, your context, everything going on around you, very aware of the people around you physically or close to you via a computer that you're working with. And I don't think current devices are well suited to that kind of world. And I am a big believer that we work at the limit of our devices. You know, you have that computer and it has a bunch of design choices, like it could be open or closed, but it can't be, you know, there's not like okay, pay attention to this interview, but be closed and like whisper in my ear if I forget to ask Sam a question or whatever.
Maybe that would be helpful.
And there's like, you know, there's like a screen, and that like limits you to the kind of same way we've had graphical user interfaces working for many decades. And there's, you know, a keyboard that was built to like slow down how fast you could get information into it. And these have just been unquestioned assumptions for a long time, but they worked. And then this totally new thing came along, and it opens up a possibility space. But I don't think the current form factor of devices is the optimal fit. It'd be very odd if it were, for this like incredible new affordance we have.
Oh man, we could talk for an hour about this, but let's move on to the next one. Cloud. You've talked about building a cloud. Here's an email we got from a listener. At my company, we're moving off Azure and directly integrating with OpenAI to power our AI experiences in the product. The focus is to insert a stream of trillions of tokens powering AI experiences through the stack. Is that the plan, to build a big cloud business in that way?
First of all, trillions of tokens, a lot of tokens. And if you asked about the need for compute and our enterprise strategy, like our enterprises have been clear with us about how many tokens they'd like to buy from us, and we are going to again fail in 2026 to meet demand. But the strategy is most companies seem to want to come to a company like us and say, I'd like to enable my company with AI. I need an API customized for my company. I need ChatGPT Enterprise customized for my company. I need a platform that can like run all these agents that I can trust my data on. I need the ability to get trillions of tokens into my product. I need the ability to have all my internal processes be more efficient. And we don't currently have like a great all-in-one offering for them. And we'd like to make that.
Is your ambition to put it up there with the AWS and Azures of the world?
I think it's a different kind of thing than those. Like I don't really have an ambition to go offer whatever all the services you have to offer to host a website, or I don't even know. But I think the concept, my guess is that people will continue to have their, call it web cloud. And then I think there will be this other thing where like a company will be like, I need an AI platform for everything that I want to do internally, the service I want to offer, whatever. And, like it does kind of live on the physical hardware in some sense, but I think it'll be a fairly different product offering.
Let's talk about discovery quickly. You've said something that's been really interesting to me, that you think that the models, or maybe it's people working with models, or the models will make small discoveries next year and big ones within 5. Is that the models? Is it people working alongside them? And what makes you confident that that's going to happen?
Yeah, people using the models, like the models that can like figure out their own questions to ask, that does feel further off. But if the world is benefiting from new knowledge, like we should be very thrilled. And, like I think the whole course of human progress has been that we build these better tools and then people use them to do more things. And then out of that process, they build more tools. And it's this like scaffolding that we climb like layer by layer, generation by generation, discovery by discovery. And the fact that a human's asking the question, I think in no way diminishes the value of the tool. So I think it's great. I'm all happy. At the beginning of this year, I thought the small discoveries were going to start in 2026. They started in 2025, in late 2025. Again, these are very small. I really don't want to overstate them. But anything feels qualitatively to me very different than nothing. And certainly when we launched ChatGPT 3 years ago, that model was not going to make any new contribution to the total of human knowledge. What it looks like from here to 5 years from now, this journey to big discoveries, I suspect it's just like the normal hill climb of AI. It just gets like a little bit better every quarter. And then all of a sudden we're like, whoa, humans augmented by these models are doing things that humans 5 years ago just absolutely couldn't do. And, whether we mostly attribute that to smarter humans or smarter models, as long as we get the scientific discoveries, I'm very happy either way.
IPO next year?
I don't know.
Do you want to be a public company? You seem like you can operate private for a long time. Would you go before you needed to? In terms of funding.
There's like a whole bunch of things at play here. I do think it's cool that public markets get to participate in value creation. And, in some sense, we will be very late to go public if you look at any previous company. It's wonderful to be a private company. we need lots of capital. We're gonna, cross all of the sort of shareholder limits and stuff at some point. So am I excited to be a public company CEO? 0%. Am I excited for OpenAI to be a public company? In some ways I am. And in some ways, I think it'll be really annoying.
I listened to your Theo Von interview very closely. Great interview.
He was really cool.
Theo really knows what he's talking about.
He's awesome.
He's citing Yoshua Bengio. He did his homework. You told him, this was right before GPT-5 came out, that GPT-5 is smarter than us in almost every way. I thought that was the definition of AGI. Isn't that AGI? And if not, has the term become somewhat meaningless?
These models are clearly extremely smart on a sort of raw horsepower basis. There's all this stuff out in the last couple of days about GPT 5.2 has an IQ of 147 or 144 or 151 or whatever it is. It's like, depending on whose test, it's some high number. And you have like a lot of experts in their field saying it can do these amazing things and it's like contributing, it's making it more effective. You have the GDP val things we talked about. One thing you don't have is the ability for the model to not be able to do something today, realize it can't, go off and figure out how to learn to get good at that thing, learn to understand it. And when you come back the next day, it gets it right. And that kind of continuous learning, like toddlers can do it. It does seem to me like an important part of what we need to build. Now, can you have something that most people would consider an AGI without that? I would say clear. I mean, there's a lot of people that would say we're at AGI with our current models. I think almost everyone would agree that if we were at the current level of intelligence and had that other thing, it would clearly be very AGI-like. But maybe most of the world will say, okay, fine, even without that, like it's doing most knowledge tasks that matter. Smarter than us and most of us in most ways, we're at AGI. It's discovering a small piece of new science, we're at AGI. What I think this means is that the term, although it's been very hard for all of us to stop using, is very underdefined. Right. I have a candidate, like one thing I would love. We got it wrong with AGI. We never defined that. The new term everyone's focused about is when we get to super intelligence. So my proposal is that we agree that, AGI kind of went whooshing by. It didn't change the world that much, or it will in the long term, but okay, fine. We've built AGIs at some point, we're in this like fuzzy period where some people think we have, and some people think we have, and more people will think we have. And then we'll say, okay, what's next? A candidate definition for superintelligence is when a system can do a better job being president of the United States, CEO of a major company, running a very large scientific lab than any person can, even with the assistance of AI. Okay. I think this was an interesting thing about what happened with chess, where chess it could beat humans. I remember this very vividly, the Deep Blue thing. And then there was a period of time where a human and the AI together were better than an AI by itself. And then the person was just making it worse. And the smartest thing was the unaided AI that didn't have the human, not understanding its great intelligence. I think something like that is like an interesting framework for superintelligence. I think it's like a long way off, but I would love to have like a cleaner definition this time around.
Well, Sam, look, I have been in your products, using them daily for 3 years.
Thank you very much.
Definitely gotten a lot better. Can't even imagine where they go from here.
We'll try to keep getting them better fast.
Okay. And this is our second time speaking, and I appreciate how open you've been both times. So thank you
very
for
much.
your time.